Welcome to Buddha at the Gas Pump. My name is Rick Archer. Buddha at the Gas Pump is an ongoing series of interviews and discussions with spiritually awakening people. I've done hundreds of them now, and if this is new to you and you'd like to check out previous ones, please go to batgap.com, B-A-T-G-A-P, and check out the past interviews menu. This program is made possible by the support of appreciative listeners and viewers, and so if you appreciate it and feel like supporting it, there's a PayPal button on every page of the site, and if you don't like PayPal, there's a donate button or link that you can check out other alternatives through. My guest today is John Butler, and John is a delightful man who lives in the UK. He came to my attention, and perhaps that of many others, when he did an interview on Conscious TV some while back, and I don't know, he's become something of a rock star, and I'm sure he'll find that phrase embarrassing, but his Conscious TV interview has like over 800,000 views, which is quite remarkable. Far more views than I've gotten in any interview before, and probably more than any Conscious TV has gotten. So I think people are charmed by his wisdom and his authenticity and his gentle demeanor, and various other qualities which you'll see as we proceed through this interview. So welcome, John. Good to see you. I'll read a brief little bio here just to get us started, but then we'll be fleshing this out a lot during the course of the interview. This is written in the first person by John. Childhood accustomed me to nature, solitude, a sense of God which needed no explaining. Stillness, beauty, depth of love called my heart back home where it belonged. But life grew out into the world, became possessed and lost the way. After a few unwilling years in business, I went to South America to, quote, make the world a better place, end quote. It wasn't so easy. Alone on a mountainside one day, an inner voice said, to make whole, be whole. I realized that, before being able to help others, I first had to work on myself. Once back in England, I looked for and found a source of meditation, which opened up a whole new way of seeing. How can I best help the world I love? This question led me through organic farming, much travel, and many adventures to ever deeper understanding of the work of prayer. I wouldn't call myself a mystic, though some say I am. I'm not sure what it means. Besides, not this, not that. Neither, in a conventional sense, am I very religious. Mystic conveys to me a wise unknowing of morning mist, with only the promise of a day to come. It's not an intellectual approach defined by man, but trusting, waiting, quietly still before each blade of grass, each little bird, reminding us of higher, nobler government than ours. So you can tell by what I just read that John is a beautiful writer, among other things, and he's written quite a bit, and I've read as much as I can in the past week, wishing I could have had time to read more. But those of you who enjoy this interview might enjoy reading his books. He's also written a lot of poetry. I also just want to add, before we get started, that we're recording this in, let's see, it's October 13th, 2018, and towards the end of this month, John's going to be conducting a meditation retreat where he lives in the UK. So if you're in the UK, if you feel like traveling there, perhaps you could attend it. Is that retreat full, John, or is it possible for people to still sign up for it?
Well, we've never done a formal thing like this before, but if people can just come. I'm there in the church every day, and people just come when they like. There's nothing regulated about it.
So people do that anyway, you're saying?
There's only it was just a local guest house that came up with the idea, and they've only got a few beds, so it's just a small number are included in that, but the church is a big church, and plenty of people can come. But you'll have to find your own accommodation.
Okay, so people could come anytime. They don't just have to come towards the end of October 2018. They could just come and...
No, I mean, I go and meditate in our local parish church every morning and evening, and it's a public place. People can come and join me if they like.
Nice. we're gonna we could jump right into your history of meditation, but maybe we should backtrack a little bit before that and talk about, you know, the influences and realizations you had when you were younger that led you to the point where you were even interested in meditating. Like you mentioned that in childhood you were accustomed to nature and solitude, a sense of God, and so on. So, you know, when do you first recall having any inklings of interest in God or spirituality, or however, whatever word we want to use?
Well, I suppose it was, I didn't use those words then. I just knew that I loved wide open spaces, and I loved quietness. I wasn't too keen on talking and crowds. I went around the world when I was 20. I wanted to see what the world was like then before men messed it up. I think I always had an
I'm afraid they already had
instinct
by that time.
well, not so much as now, but I think I always had a strong instinct of the natural compared to the artificial. It was the time when artificial chemicals were beginning to be used on farming. So that word was quite widely used then, artificiality. And also, being a countryman born and bred, another common expression was townie, which described those not fortunate enough to be born in the country. And somehow that also was equated in my typical countryman's mind with a sort of unnatural approach to things. And of course, machinery, motor cars were then replacing horses. Unnatural, weren't they? You see, I'm well grounded in what you might call old-fashioned ways of life. So I don't think I used words like spiritual, for quite a long time. But I was sent to boarding school at the age of 7, and for 10 years I had compulsory chapel twice, 2 or 3 times every day. In fact, always before meals, so even more often during the day, we were brought to a recognition of God and the church. It was the Church of England, of course. So I'm very well versed in all the traditional prayers and hymns and the Bible. I know large extracts of it by heart, as I was taught, and I always felt comfortable, familiar with those old things. They've all been changed now. They've all been modernized and translated, but men of my age tend to hold to the old words. Spirit somehow, or spirituality, I don't think I ever heard of that term until, probably I must have been in my early 20s, I suppose, when I first even thought of using that word, what it meant. I suppose I just turned naturally to nature, where things seemed comprehensible as my means of understanding life. I suppose that was my natural meditation before I ever thought of using the word or ever heard of anything called meditation. Just to be quiet in nature. It was second nature to me. It always has been.
When you were a schoolboy and being required to attend chapel 3 times a day and all, and read and memorize much of the Bible, Did the Bible really speak to you? Did you feel like you really understood what it was saying, or was it more as like a chore, that, an obligation?
Well, it's a lifetime's exercise to understand what it's saying. I'm still learning. But what I loved about it were the many references to animals and nature with which I felt at home. I was thrown into this very alien world of other little boys. Being born 2 years before the outbreak of war, we lived in the deep countryside. I hardly knew what another little boy was until I went to school. And there I found myself suddenly thrust into this world of competition and sport and motor cars and things for which I had no interest. But that daily, twice daily opportunity to hide my head in my hands like that and say, God bless Mummy and Daddy and Sammy, our dog, that was my connection back to what I loved and was familiar with. And so many of the old hymns have references to fox has its rest and the bird has its nest in the shade of the cedar tree. But thy couch was the sod, O thou Son of God. All these things I loved, not so much because I understood anything about God, but because they used words that were familiar to me about trees and animals and the earth. To a countryman, the Bible is full of these natural pictures of nature, because that's really where certainly the old prophets drew their inspiration from, the natural world. And Jesus' teaching is full of references to nature, to the wind, the water, to the flowers. That was my connection with religion as a boy.
I remember reading a passage in one of your books, or perhaps it was in one of your recordings, where you spoke about your current appreciation of nature and how everything is kind of a wonder. And I mean, you can see a bug crawling on the sidewalk and just marvel at the sort of the divine intelligence that could, give rise to such a beautiful creation.
Nature never failed me. I was lucky enough that I worked as a farmer for most of my active life. So the open fields and the animals are home. And as I began to discover people who talked about spirituality and opened my first spiritual books, and particularly when I listened to people talking about these things, I always somehow measured it against the experience of coming back to my farm. And if it resonated with what was taught me by nature around me, then I could take it. And what didn't do that, then it didn't somehow ring true for me. I can't overestimate the value and how much I attribute value to that natural connection. For spirituality is actually natural, and it is being natural. And whatever it picks up in its passage through the human mind that is not equatable with nature, it is an infallible standard that you can trust. Human cleverness is always, it's inclined to steal people away. Nature brings you back to earth.
There's something very profound about that, to my mind. because it would seem to me that you know, I've heard you speak of the what is that? The parable of the lost son who goes out and squanders all his fortune, and you know, then eventually comes back, and it's almost like all of humanity are those lost sons for the most part. We've sort of all strayed away from God. Yeah, go ahead and elaborate on that. That might be a trigger for you.
Well, we strayed away from nature.
Right.
We've become unnatural, haven't we? And that's it.
Prodigal son, that's the word I was thinking.
In this day and age when, you know, God is a difficult word to use, because for so many people it's a bit of a switch off. And you're immediately into, well, what do you mean by God? That's why I always feel safest keeping my feet on the ground and referring to the wind and the rain and the grass, which at least is common human experience.
Yeah. And like, as you say, there's all this controversy about what God may be, and, you know, whether or not you believe in him and so on, but God is not a concept. I mean, everything is a concept just for the sake of talking about it. We form concepts, but the word refers to something real, presumably. And so what is that something? And I think you're pointing to it when you talk about nature. You know, and it's most evident there. I mean, you can look at the wind and the trees and everything else, and you can see some sort of intelligence conducting all those processes that is far more artful than any human can fabricate.
Well, that's one way of approaching it. I told you I was accustomed to silence since childhood. My early books on spirituality, well, I hardly remember what they were, really. I don't think I probably understood very much about them at all. But I started to meditate when I was 26. And fairly soon, I used to attend what were called weekly groups then. And fairly soon they began to talk about stillness and silence. Well, I thought, almost to my surprise, well, that's obvious, isn't it? It was obvious. It's always been obvious for me. And particularly alone in the fields, you can hardly not be aware of it. So why was that suddenly equated with such a spiritual practice? It couldn't be more simple. And gradually I began to figure things out. So this is what they've been talking about all the time. Where does stillness end and God begin? What do we mean by all these highfalutin words anyway? We talk about them as though they were items in the supermarket, and most people don't know what they're talking about, really. We're just swapping ideas, and as you say, concepts. Come back. Come back to just being. Stop talking. That's the great key. Stop talking. Just come back to listen. Listen to the skylarks and the wind blowing. And you're right there in that peace that passes understanding. And so much of this mystery, it becomes very simple. It's not a thinking process at all. It's not a reasoning. The world's wonderful, therefore there must be an intellect behind it. Now, I'm a bit guarded of all that sort of approach. It's so simple and practical. It's not a thinking approach. It's a realization. A practical realization that here now we're living, well, in those days, of course, I thought it was there in the fields. Now I'm more accustomed to finding it where I am, which is always here and now.
So in other words, you could now be living in the heart of London if you had to for some reason, but that silence, that presence would be just as palpable there as it is out in the countryside.
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. When you get accustomed to it, it's of course, we do forget. This is our human condition, isn't it? We forget and we get lost in thought. But practice, good spiritual practice, is always bringing us back to recognize what is already here, from which we have simply wandered away, like that prodigal son.
Some people criticize spiritual practice because of what you just said. They say it's already here. Why do you need to do anything to get that which is already here?
Well, only because we're unnatural, artificial creatures.
And so meditation can sort of restore our naturalness, you're saying?
It can restore our connection with naturalness.
Yeah. Another thing that people sometimes say to me, I don't know if you've ever heard this, that, you know, well, you've been meditating over 50 years. Haven't you gotten it by now? I mean, you know, why are you still seeking? Why don't, you know, why kind of keep beating a dead horse, so to speak? I mean, just, do you ever get that one?
Sounds laughable. Haven't you gotten it by now? Whatever does one mean? Where do you think we're going? Whatever are you expecting to find? What is it? Look, this stillness, let's figure it out just sitting here, because it's always much simpler. You and I sitting here, you in America, I'm here in England. And if we just listen, stop talking for a moment, and may be aware of stillness. Just simple stillness, in which my voice sounds, my eyes blink. There's a sort of slight hum coming from the computer or something. But the stillness is like an invisible background to that. Now, where does that stillness end? It has no end, does it? Because it's like a gateway to the infinite. And one of the few things we can safely say about God is that it is infinite. Now, infinite has no end, does it? So where does exploration end? The adventure has no end. It goes from better to better. Ever more wonderful.
I know that in mathematics they say that, well, you can take infinity and then you can add something to it. Take infinity and add 10. And then you have, in a sense, you've created a greater infinity, which is kind of an absurdity or contradiction in terms, but mathematicians talk that way. So in the case of someone like yourself, you know, you've been deeply, you know, steeped in stillness for a long time, but you still meditate quite a few hours a day. And so in your personal experience, do you find that somehow stillness, even though it's always there, is becoming enriched or deepened or something through your continued practice?
Self doesn't become enriched.
Okay.
It is already infinite. What you can do, and this also has no end. You know, there's a lovely saying, two things have no limit: the foolishness of man and the mercy of God. Now, so long as I'm living in a body that's going to die, a mortal body with aches and pains, then I am in a corrupted condition. Now, infinite, this stillness, which is so immediately present, it doesn't die, does it? You and I, generations can die. All the bombs in the world can go off, and it doesn't change it. It is indestructible. Whereas this mortal figure you see sitting on this screen is only too destructible. Quite soon now I shall die. And what's that? I'm going to the ground. I'm food for worms, aren't I? This is the fate of man, mortality. Sorry, I've rather lost the thread of the question.
Well, we're talking about...
But you were saying something about adding something to infinite. Yes. Now, this stillness, let's because stillness is a sort of approachable word, isn't it? We can use stillness as a sort of something that we can comprehend, whereas infinite is a bit sort of out of reach, really. But this stillness, if you think of it like a great umbrella, really, a sort of invisible background umbrella that contains the whole world, everything, all the numbers anyone's ever dreamed of, everything, all the millions and billions of subdivisions that make up what we call creation. It's all included. You can only add to it what is excluded. So the question is really meaningless, isn't it? How can you add 10 to absolute beauty, for example, or freedom, or love?
And so what are you adding then by your spiritual practice?
Out of the way. Mm-hmm. You remove the impediments. That's what spiritual practice does. Mm-hmm. Now, of course, to begin with, we don't like to think that John Butler is an impediment. Now, then you go into the subject a bit more, and you'll see that my mind is constantly throwing up distractions, appetites and things. It's a very fickle companion, and it is this unruly mind of ours that really gets in the way all the time. And what meditation does is help one to pass through that. Mm-hmm. Now, this is the trick, really. This is the technique of spiritual practice. You can't improve God. You can't make God's love greater than it is. All we can do is try to diminish the folly, the corruptible folly called John, so that I'm not impeding the light. Look at me. If there's a light and I put up my hand, I cast a shadow, don't I? You see, it's as simple as that. My hand is a block to the light, isn't it? Therefore, I project darkness into the world. If you open your mouth and look inside, what's inside? It's dark, isn't it? So that's how darkness is created. We stand, as it were, as a block to absolute light. And stillness, of course, is equatable with light because it has no weight, does it? Stillness is well, you could carry on the sequence a bit further. Perhaps I could talk more about this later. But, well, maybe I think I'm straying from the point.
No, you're doing well.
we'll come back to this again and again, that the only problem in the world is me, is this ego. I think that's a fairly well-known term these days, ego, the I, me or mine, that thinks of me as a separate entity, body and mind, something called John, with all his thoughts and emotions and all that. When we meditate, you see, we transcend. We go beyond, just like an aeroplane goes through clouds. We go through this overshadowing of these clouds of the mind and access the open sky beyond. Well, there are no bodies there. There are no material, mortal bodies up there. And that's really what freedom is. And that is endless. And there it all begins to make sense. You begin to understand what life actually is.
And so has it been your experience that the repeated immersion in that sky-like unboundedness of presence has kind of cultured the instrument that we call John, so that it can embody or better live established in that and not get overshadowed as easily by things?
Not get overshadowed as easily. Well, that
no guarantee, but not as easily.
There are no guarantees, but although I'm sorry, I'm rather fumbling with my words, but I'll get into my stride.
Oh, that's fine.
It's how I couldn't possibly sit here in front of a screen and say these things unless I had experience of it, and enough experience to give me the confidence to express this. It's not something I've read. It's nothing anybody's told me. Though some of the things I've read may have confirmed it, but it arises out of actual practical experience, right. And that really is its validity.
So feel free to, anytime I ask a question and you want to go off in a different direction, feel free to do that, because there's no script here. We're just kind of playing this as it goes. But you learn, as I understand it, you learned meditation at the school, something called the School of Meditation in London, which was established or founded by Swami Shantanand Saraswati, right? Who was Shankaracharya of Jyotirmata.
By him, but he guided the school.
Got the inspiration.
I never met him. The principal of the school used to go over to India every couple of years or so and have an audience with him, which was then recorded, and these teachings were then conveyed to us students over the course of these weekly groups that I used to go to.
I see.
And I count myself very fortunate that I had that introduction to meditation. I think I've been very well taught,
yeah.
And I know no better.
I'll tell you an interesting tidbit which you may not know. Shantanand was the successor to Brahmananda Saraswati, who was the Shankaracharya of Jyotirmata before him, and Maharishi Mahesh Yogi was sort of brother-disciple to Shantanand in that ashram. Shantanand was a cook, and Maharishi was some sort of secretary. And then when Brahmananda Saraswati died, there was some controversy about who the successor would be, but it's a long story, but it ended up being Shantanand. And Maharishi was a friend of his and a supporter of his, and so on. And the interesting thing is that these Swamis were what are known as Dandi Swamis. Dandi refers to the stick or staff that they carry. But the Dandi Swamis practice an effortless japa meditation, using a mantra, effortless technique of meditation, which is what transcendental meditation is, and which it sounds like your meditation is, what you've been practicing. So I think what you've been practicing is very akin to what I learned back in the 60s, and it would be interesting perhaps for people to understand the mechanics of it. I could perhaps ask you to explain that, because you've talked a lot already in this interview about naturalness and the beauty of the naturalness of nature and its naturalness and so on. But I think that you kind of stumbled upon, we both did, a technique of meditation which employs naturalness and which kind of uses nature's intelligence as rather than individual will or effort to do what it does, and which kind of attunes you to that naturalness in nature's functioning. That's a bit of a mouthful, but does that resonate with with your experience? And
to some extent, Rick. Well, I've already used the analogy of clouds, haven't I? And I like to use the analogy of a mantra being rather like an aeroplane. Is that we're all the human problem is really that we are lost in thought, in what you could call the clouds of the mind, that are always interpreting and creating, as it were, a secondary existence based on me and my experience. Now, meditation uses a word, a mantra itself is a word, which if you focus on this word, it diverts your attention away from thinking. If you attend to something with full attention, you can't at the same time be thinking of something else. That's the simple principle of it. You've got to meditate with full attention. It's no good. If you do it with half attention, you'll sit there thinking and maybe say the mantra a few times, which is maybe better than nothing, but it's much better if you can do it with full attention. And this takes some learning, because it's quite difficult to attend to something for a prolonged period. But then, and this gradually becomes subtler and subtler without you doing anything about it. And gradually you find that somehow this grip of the discursive mind gives way to a feeling of spaciousness. It comes as peace or spaciousness or stillness, or many ways. Many words are all fairly analogous words, mean much the same thing. And so you realize there's something beyond our normal thinking mind. This, in a way, may rather whet the appetite, because it's a nice experience. It really is. It's absolutely, it can be thrilling, it can be a bit frightening for those that are nervous until you get used to it. It certainly gives an alternative to this entombment. I like that word you use, this entombment within our own personal thinking process, our own personal mind. And really it leads on from there, deeper and deeper and deeper into that which you find beyond the clouds, beyond the mind. Now, there are two aspects of meditation, what we call the inner aspect, which I've just been describing, which takes place within the mind, and the other called the outer practice, which consists of simply giving attention to the here and now. And actually, if we do that, it has much the same effect. If I really listen to the sound of my voice, then almost without doing anything about it, I'm aware that my voice is sounding within stillness, within something which is bigger than my voice. A listening, a a reception, a silence, in which not only my voice, but all voices are contained. Now then, now we're getting into big country, aren't we? What's all that about then? It's really allowing our awareness of what's already here. It's really sort of rather like cleaning your eyes so you see better. It's rather like removing the debris from our eyes that tend to look at everything and then say I like or don't like it. It's just looking at what's here. And when it happens for the first time, it's often amazing. Good heavens. You just see the tablecloth in front of you and the play of shadows and wires and things. Amazing. Well, this is just the first step. More and more. It's said that true knowledge is not, you can't learn knowledge. It is revealed. There's the words of Jesus, know what is in thy sight, and all that is hidden will be revealed unto you.
Interesting.
Now that is absolutely it. Know what's in our sight. And not only know what's in our sight, but in our hearing too. If we listen with sufficient attention, it's the background really to it just expands. The subtlety of the vibration, it has no end. So gradually, and it is a very gradual process. I've been meditating now for, goodness me, nearly 55 years. It's a long time. And I'm afraid all too many enthusiastic people, they think they can, just sit down, going on a retreat or something, and they'll get it straight away. But I assure you, you do get something fairly soon. But the adventure, and it is an adventure, has no end.
Mm-hmm. You can sit down at a piano and bang a few keys and make a sound on day one, but it takes a while to be a maestro.
And of course, people always sort of say, well, what's there? How do you describe it? But you can see that words themselves have a limit, have a boundary. And that's why it's actually beyond description, because description can only take you as far as time and space and name and form. And all these things are really limitations encompassing what they appear to mean.
Sure.
And again, if I may quote from the Bible, eye hath not seen nor ear heard, neither hath entered into the heart of man the things that God hath prepared for those that love him. You see, it's so much more than what we can even presume to access with our thoughtful mind. The heart can take us much further when we start functioning from the heart, because the heart brings us into these unlimited aspects that we're all familiar with, we use every day, and we don't always realize that these things are indescribable. Who's ever been able to describe love or freedom or indeed life?
Or anything for that matter. I mean, try describing what a mango tastes like, and you could hear a 2-hour lecture on it. You could go home and think about it, but it's not gonna be like tasting one.
Absolutely, Rick. That's absolutely right. So a word that's often used in spiritual talk is realization. It's when something becomes real to you. And of course, we all try in our ways to convey this because it's so good. When you discover something wonderful, we all want to share it, don't we? Although I often think perhaps the deepest meanings in life are often, it seems, best shared by silence.
Yeah, especially since the deepest meanings lie in the realm of silence, and one can only experience that for oneself. It can't be conveyed verbally or conceptually.
Something I could say here, perhaps, is that to some people, perhaps, concepts of stillness and silence seem empty. What's there, they say? Like that airplane going beyond the clouds. Well, what's there? Nothing's there, is it? No thing. And yet, everything is really it's really the causal world. The causal world is really another way of describing the spiritual world. For all that we see and hear, the names and forms of creation, are really like precipitations or crystallizations of what's there before the name and form. Like ice. We can pick up ice, we can draw it, we can, that's an object, isn't it? It's a thing. Before ice was water, before water there is steam, there's vapor, and then subtle and subtler and subtler sorts of vapor. This is how creation arises, from the unmanifest into the manifest. And that's why those that explore spirit, it's far from being empty, it's actually the fullness of everything that appears in limited form in the material world. That's why there's no difficulty going deeper into spirit, because that is the fullness of what we experience on earth in part. It's the totality. It's the oneness of what we know as separation. It's the undivided wholeness of what we know in little bits here and there, which we're always trying to put together. But the wholeness is just found by letting go our identification with the separate part. You don't lose anything, even though you may appear to be just sitting there with your eyes closed in deepest meditation. You're actually in the fullest possible participation in the creative process, because you have gone to that causal source of it all and removed the barrier of separation. That's why, incidentally, prayer, which is really another way of describing what I'm doing, is the greatest power on earth.
Of course. Pardon? I was just going to say, of course, there are levels of prayer and degrees of prayer, and the Christian mystics talk about this. And some are much more discursive or verbal, or asking for specific things and so on. But others are much more akin to what you've been describing as your meditation experience, very deep, nonverbal, settling into the unboundedness. Communion.
See, because the as we separation is really something we manufacture in our own minds. This idea of me. You can see it in a little child how very early on in life it starts. Often encouraged by its parents, talks about me and mine, and then divides the world into want and don't want, and I'm John, and somebody else is Sally, somebody else has different names, forms. This is what we call growing up. Well, actually, we're really growing into imprisonment, into this. You can see really life is an imprisonment where we live. Sentenced to hard labour under sentence of death. That's really what life is, isn't it? What we call life. But of course it isn't life, really. It's a shadow. This whole world is really a shadow of divine origin. And but we live in it because we know no better. We try to figure out one bit of dark, one shadow with another. But those of us that are lucky enough to somehow get drawn into a meditative process which enables one to sort of let go this fixation on separation and taste the source. We discover a completion because everything is contained in its pure existence. And in pure existence, there is no corruption, there is no death, there's no killing and eating. There's none of this incessant chasing after insatiable desires, because one, and it is one, is complete. One is complete. We find completion by letting go of incompletion. And incompletion is me. Why are people interested to listen to a program like this? Because they feel in some way that we're incomplete. You think listening to somebody else might help to fill up some blocks in your understanding, maybe. I know it's easy to talk. I hope something of the magnitude of what I'm trying to express comes through. I often feel that I fumble with words, and I hope, even if you will forgive my words, you will pick up that this unchanging stillness that lies behind the words.
Well, for thousands of years, people have been trying to put into words the things that you're saying today. And I think you're doing a pretty good job of it. No one has ever been able to completely convey what they're trying to put into words. As we were saying about the mango, you can talk all day about one and still not going to be like tasting one. But words are how we communicate. And I think that the value of words is not in the words themselves, but perhaps as an inspiration to get one interested in having the experience themselves. You go to a lecture about a mango, that sounds good. I think I'll go home and buy one and try one, and then you have the taste, and now I know what he was talking about.
Yes, of course. Yeah. Communication, well, yes, it usually starts with words, doesn't it? Words are obviously an important part of it. Sound waves soon come up against barriers, don't they? Again, if we come back to the stillness, and even to a little extent merge in this stillness, we realize that this stillness isn't confined to this room, is it? It actually is outside the room too. It contains the whole outside too. Where is the end of it? Isn't the whole world contained in stillness? And what? It knows no barrier, does it? Now, see, stillness, isn't it the same as silence? Isn't that the same as peace? How many people are longing for peace, and yet it's so immediately present and freely available, isn't it? Peace. Now then, let's go on a bit further. Space. Is space any different? And what do we mean by spirit anyway? What is spirit? Is space the same as spirit? Where does one end and the other begin? And isn't spirit, well, they say that God is spirit. So where do any of these things begin or end? Or is this simplicity of just being still actually synonymous with what we may call God?
Be still and know that I am God.
Well, exactly, yes, this is a very well-known quotation, isn't it? And yet it's so practical, isn't it? How can it be more immediately available to us than simply this stillness?
This is a theme that you've been touching upon throughout this whole conversation. I want to just sort of interject a comment and have you elaborate on it. But before I do that, I just want to remind those who are listening live that if you have a question you'd like to ask John, you can go to the upcoming interviews page on batgap.com and scroll down to the bottom, and there you'll see a form through which you can submit your question. Yeah, I mean, you've been talking about stillness. You've been talking about the fact that the world is kind of tumultuous, and yet stillness is all pervading, and so somehow this tumult is happening in the midst of stillness, unbeknownst to most of the people who experience it as tumult. You know, they feel like life is crazy, and I'm upset, and I'm afraid, and this and that, and yet, you know, they have this treasure within of deep silence and deep stillness, which they could access if they had a means to do so. And you've talked about your meditation practice, and you talked about subtler and subtler, meditation leading one to subtler and subtler levels of thinking or of experience. And I'm reminded of an example that we could use, and that is that if you and I were to shout what we were saying right now at the top of our lungs, people would probably have to turn their speakers down. It would be really obvious and gross. Speaking in this tone of voice, they don't have to turn their speakers down. They can still hear us. Or we could just start thinking what we're saying right now, and people wouldn't hear us at all, but we'd still hear ourselves. And so in the same direction, there are yet subtler levels of thought which we ourselves don't experience because they're too subtle. We don't experience a thought until it becomes sufficiently loud in the mind or gross. And so what meditation does is it enables you to sort of step by step traverse those subtler levels of thought right back down to the field of silence or stillness from which they emerge. And then, as you say, to just sort of marinate there, you didn't say that, but to rest or reside there and kind of imbibe that stillness into your mind and body, your physiological functioning. And when you come back to the field of activity, you bring it with you to some extent. It naturally is able to be retained or stabilized in the midst of dynamic activity. You could be, doing something very busy in the marketplace, and yet it stays with you to some extent, and that grows over the years, which gets us back to this question of why would you want to be meditating for 55 years? Well, it just continues to grow.
Well, yes, but may I come back to very simple, ordinary, natural behavior. Now, I happen to live in a little tourist centre in the middle of a beautiful part of England, and many people come here on sunny days in summer. There's a lovely river just down the road, and they just sit by the river there and maybe feed the ducks and just feel the quietness of the water flowing by, have their fish and chips, and let the children play, let the dog run in the park. And at the end of the day, they go back and say, I've had a lovely day. They feel better for it. Now, this is also a district of hills, a great walking country. And many thousands of people come from the cities round about with their hiking boots on and go for a walk up in the hills. And again, without any thought of being spiritual. They just feel better for it. Now, years ago, when everybody had a coal fire in their house, and there were no televisions, people would just sit by the fire at the end of the day and watch the embers. Maybe the wife would do her knitting and mending, and that brought people to peace. They loved it naturally. Probably even didn't think of peace, it was natural. Now, life is full of these natural, what you could call meditations, because meditation is as natural as just that, as natural as going for a walk in the country or taking the dog out. It doesn't, people have always known the presence of God. Before, in a way, they got so clever that they began to doubt it. One of the notable things about real experience is that there is no doubt or question about it. Doubts and questions lie entirely in this part of the human. And truth is actually utterly simple. It's the simplest thing. The simplest thing there is. It is simplicity itself, just like sitting here, hearing these words, and just feeling the peace, the stillness. And all the wars in all the world aren't big enough to interrupt this peace, because it's universal. And all the little human, irritations that go on, even the pains of your body are contained within this. So I get a bit alarmed when people start talking too much about, I ought to meditate or something like that. Because life, one of the first things, most importantly, is just to stop talking. I really think this is the first step in the spiritual life, is just to stop talking. Just be quiet. And then do what you love. If you ask people what they love doing, it very often brings you to just some simple thing. And that gathers all your interest and because it willingly goes to what you love, to what you find attractive.
It's true, John, but even in your own life, you were doing what you loved. You were living in the country, you were farming, you did some traveling around the world and this and that, and yet you had your problems and your difficulties and your heartbreaks, and you didn't feel there was a lack of contentment. Yes. And then you learned to meditate, and you did that, and then gradually over the years contentment grew. And as you say, everybody in the world takes walks or looks at a fire or has their peaceful moments, and yet you alluded to wars, which are the opposite of peace. So obviously there've been a lot of horrible situations in life, and yet all of that, on the foundation of stillness and presence, and yet apparently those who were perpetrating those things weren't very well tuned into that stillness or presence. And so, perhaps a collective attunement to that would be beneficial for humanity.
Yes, of course, you're quite right in what you say. Well, nearly all spiritual life, it starts with one's own self-interest. What's in it for me? Very soon, as identification with me begins to loosen and expand, it begins to include a wider world. It's said that the second step in meditation is with and for other people. And for me, of course, I always thought in terms of animals and the land. And then there's a further step even beyond that when we meditate for the love of the work itself. Work is, by the way, what I call spiritual work, which is this work of dealing with all this, with the realm of darkness, of course, all the works of dark, all the unpleasantness in life, the conflict in life, which if it doesn't come from your own self, comes from all around you. And we have to face this day by day and deal with it. And indeed, as the deeper and stronger we become in our own practice, the more it seems we are given to cope with, the more we somehow embrace all the troubles of the world. And I often think of, again, the words of Jesus, bear ye one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ, the law of truth. Bear ye one another's burdens. And indeed this is part of the work, and is what I tend now to refer to as the work of prayer. But when yes, I listen to the news. I'm well aware of what's going on in the world. I've had a very full experience of life myself. I've not only been through awful depressions and troubles in my own life, but I've seen much of the world. I'm no stranger to the works of dark. And somehow all this is brought to peace in well, perhaps even better than that, because I've already alluded to prayer. Of course, like all spiritual work, one's understanding of what is meant by these things, it grows and develops through many, many years of life. I really think of prayer and meditation as the same thing. I know one starts from thinking of God as something over there to whom you ask for something, and meditation has a slightly different approach, but they come together. And indeed what really gives this work meaning, at least at my stage of life, is this worldwide absorption or realization of the human agony and its redemption in the work of through prayer, in the all perfecting love of God in spirit. And again, it's something hard for people to understand, that when you're blessed with times of light, enlightenment, there is no more darkness. There really isn't. Does the sun see shadow? In the light there is no dark. Well, everybody says, but what about serial or crimes or something? Well, I showed you before how my hand casts a shadow, doesn't it? And how this shadow is actually the beginning of what creates the works of dark, which is everything that we call wrong in life. And now then, as you learn to, of course you can't cut your hands off, I can't get rid of my body, it's still like that. But as you lose your identification with this, and as it were more merge into the light, and no longer function as an impediment to this light, then what stops the light? What stops the light flooding the world? And in that light, what happens to this appearance of darkness? Is it as real as we think? What happens to death? What happens to depression? You know, it just melts away as mist before the sun. People say, why does God make a world like this? This is made by you and me. This is what man does with it. This is a projection of man's blindness. The world is what we make it. The real world is perfect. It is heaven. It is the kingdom of God. There's no darkness there at all. There's no separation. One complete perfection. That is the destiny of man. That's what we are called to. And that you referred in that reading that you made, first of all, how as a young man of 26, I think, in South America, I seemed to receive this message to make whole, be whole. Of course, I didn't understand what it meant then. In fact, almost the whole of my life had been spent in trying to understand, a deeper meaning, what that meant. But I think I am nearer understanding it now. That in wholeness, or holiness, everything is whole. That's really how it is.
So are you saying that as one becomes less and less of an impediment to the light, one at the same, to the degree that one does become less an impediment, one at the same time becomes kind of a transmitter of the light and helps to infuse it into the darkness or to illuminate the darkness?
So deeply embedded is this idea that I have to be instrumental in this process.
No, I'm saying that if there's less of the I, then the inner light can shine through without impediment. Not that I am shining light on things, but that light within is passing through. Well, there's that saying, and in the Bible, a lens, seeing through a lens darkly, as if the lens is occluded. And then William Blake talked about cleaning the windows of perception. So there are these metaphors about a lens or a glass or something that's dirty and isn't allowing the light to pass through very well.
Yes, all these are relevant at different stages on the way. But ultimately, one merges in the one, and there's no more two. And that's how it is. There's no more instrumentality about it. One and no more two. And it really cannot be described. Why do I still meditate? I'm not sure that I have a reason, really.
Or that you need one, even.
I'm not even really sure what I do any longer. I go through the process of sitting down, I don't really know what happens. I suppose I'm taken in some way.
Yeah, you say in your...
And yet, sorry to interrupt,
No, go ahead.
and yet
I'm sorry.
there is nothing, but nothing in life more meaningful. It is the completeness of which what we call life is but a shadow. Sorry, Rick, you go back to you.
Oh, that's okay. I was just playing off the point you made that you said in your book, realization comes not at our bidding, but as it were from the other side. So it's not like you're doing something, it's more like you're...
On this long process, and bear in mind, I've been practicing for 55 years. Twice a day, without fail, for 55 years I've been doing it. So if anybody starts on this journey, do be prepared for the long haul. And it's said that the most important requirement is determination.
Yeah.
And there's another thing I sometimes throw in. I think in many ways it helps to be a pretty unhappy individual, as I was and have been, because if you're really miserable in this life, there's a motive to look for something better, turn to something better.
I think you're right, and you might be more likely to notice a contrast when you do turn to something better, and that will motivate you.
Yes. Yes, it's funny looking back now. I can see all my periods of despair and misery actually as
codes,
as aids on the way, and I'm quite sure this life is like a school in which we learn by our mistakes, and we never stop learning. But keep plodding on, my friends. Don't give up, even though it seems to be getting you nowhere.
But when you use words like long haul and determination and plodding on and so on, it makes it sound like a drudgery or a tedious journey, and I don't think you would characterize it that way.
On this journey of meditation, and this also is quite an important point, I've never, ever, in all my years, ever experienced anything bad, frightening or sinister. So, it is a light, it is a journey from darkness into light, from confusion into simplicity. And you can't argue with it. It's even at the very beginning. It's a real experience. It isn't something that you can read about in books or be told. It's when you just sitting here. I can look at the screen, or I can turn and look at the sky through the window. Now the screen has its. This is like the per 4 months, aren't we? We're doing this in this context of a Skype interview. Now out there is the sky, and there in contrast is like a freedom, isn't there? An infinite dimension. And meditation's like that. You can't argue about it because when you turn from what is small and limited into what is less limited, you instinctively recognize it. And then, of course, we come back into this world again. But something of that other dimension gradually permeates our existence, our mortal existence.
Yeah. Did Shantanan ever use the analogy of dyeing a cloth? They use this in India sometimes. You take a cloth and dip it in colored a cloth, like a piece of fabric. Take it and dip it into colored dye, and then you bleach it in the sun. And then you dip it in the dye, and then you bleach it in the sun. And each time it bleaches in the sun, it retains a bit more of its color until eventually it's color fast, whether it's in the dye or the sun, same color. So that's kind of what you're describing here.
Yes, yes, certainly that, and many, many other analogies are used, indeed.
Yeah.
Yes, the wave and the ocean, I've already said mist before the sun,
Mm-hmm. What's your...
Yes,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No.
Well, I was going to ask you about God. Presence, silence, stillness, we've used those sorts of words. But obviously most of the religious scriptures of the world talk about God a lot. And they also talk about presence and silence. But how would you equate the two? Or is there something, are we implying something even more profound or significant when we use the term God?
Everybody, well, I won't say everybody, but many people have a very definite concept of God, or we're brought up on a verbal formulation which we repeat with more or less understanding of what it means. I'm a little bit wary of entering into religious language because of so many people have so many interpretations of it. When I was a young farmer, I was very impressed how the fact that my feet would crush the grass under my feet. Now, I loved grass. I've always loved grass. And you've only got to just kneel down and observe grass, especially an old pasture, which we have many in England, to see the wonder of it, the delicacy, the beauty, the order, the unbelievable, miraculous miracle of what grass is. I love the phrase, the forgiveness of nature growing over all the mess that we make of it. Well, I think there was, because you know the phrase, the Lamb of God. I've kept sheep for many years. I always loved sheep. And as I began to observe my own and understand what happens to sheep, the life of sheep, this phrase, the Lamb of God, meant ever more to me the way that these innocent creatures are sacrificed to provide for man, of course, food for man. Why should it be like that? Why should this lovely grass be trodden down, broken and bruised under my feet? Still more when motor cars or something drive over it without a second thought. And then I began to think of Jesus, the Lamb of God, broken for our sins, sacrificed for our sins. Where does Jesus end and my lambs or the grass begin? Is Jesus just a human embodiment? 2,000 years ago, written about in the Bible? Isn't Jesus, as he himself says, I'm with you always? What do we mean by that? Do we see a man in white clothes walking about? No, we see lambs, don't we, and grass. Well then, aren't the lambs Jesus? Isn't the grass, isn't every blade of grass Jesus? Again, the scripture tells us all in all. Everything is Jesus. Everything is the spirit that we call God, crystallized or incarnate in this world in which we live, and dying, being sacrificed, consumed for our sins, which is my projection of darkness. I project darkness because I've turned away from God. I am a sinner. Fortunately, you haven't asked me the question, am I a Christian or something like that, because I feel much safer saying, I am a sinner, because I am. And for 80 years, I've done my best to obstruct the light and created the works of darkness. And so for my sin, lambs are killed, the innocent die, and the grass is crushed. And this really was, I'm beginning to sort of get in my stride.
Oh, good. We're getting warmed up here.
This really became the great motivation for me to practice ever more and more and more, as I began to realize that it was my responsibility how my beloved nature suffered, how I was the cause of that suffering, not because of plastic bags and this sort of stuff, but because of what went on in my silly head. This is the original pollution, which puts all, our outer pollution, which we typically, think of as if we clear up pollution, it'll be better. But dear friends, if only you'd attend to cleaning up the pollution in our own minds, it would be a lot more effective. And so for this, Christ is crucified literally in every creature on earth, which is incarnate God, God in everything. Then I remember how sort of step by step, perhaps it seems so simple and obvious to me now at the end of my long life, but it's been so thrillingly exciting as little by little by little I began to realize what it's all about, whatever they mean when they talk of sin and Christ and redemption. And indeed, you asked me what we mean by God. Well, I will even venture to confine him within words. But God to me is, as I've said to you, is perhaps the best way I can convey what I understand by it is take this simple stillness and just keep on expanding it. Expanding it beyond all limits to where it has no end.
Some might ask, based upon what you just said, that, okay, you wanted to diminish the footprint, so to speak, of your life on nature, the damage you might be inadvertently doing through your actions. You forgive them, Father, they know not what they do. You wanted to diminish that. And some might ask, okay, well, have you stopped eating lambs? And, and there was a passage in your book where you had this pet pig who followed you around everywhere, and you eventually had to slaughter him, and it took you 3 years to eat all the pork that you got from that. And that might seem kind of contradictory to in some people's minds. How do you reconcile that kind of thing as a farmer?
Well, yes, I know this. Yes, one can get awfully bogged down in these things, can't one? Well, it is a very humbling process to recognize. I'll use this word sin, if you don't mind. I know it's rather politically unacceptable now, but
as long as we define it so everybody
so
knows what we're using the word for.
It's very illustrative of our human condition. And because we are all sinners, and we cannot not partake of this, of the consequence of sin, we all have to share in the corporate guilt, if you like, of sin, and bear the burden of what we have caused, and realize that it's only through the grace of this spiritual radiation which one may turn towards that one can again, words. I must be very careful of what I say, or I'll say something foolish. The words, at the time of Jesus' crucifixion, not my will, but yours be done. We use the expression, God knows, don't we? I don't know. I think one thing meditation has taught me is gradually to trust in myself less, and in this, in God more. The less of me, the more of God. Yes, that's a phrase I like to use. The less of me, the more of God. And perhaps there's no quality more suitable to our human condition than that of humility, or realizing that without that spiritual grace, we can do nothing. And that in surrender to that, the inadequacy of John to really do anything very much apart from write a few books and fumble about with words in an interview like this, is surrendering to that which we call almighty and all merciful. And the deeper one gets into that, the more you realize that perhaps particularly that second description, all merciful, is absolutely true. I spoke previously of the foolishness of man and the mercy of God, the wisdom of God that governs all things. Why does he allow wars? Well, you see, it's all a great lesson for us. We learn by our mistakes. God doesn't create any bad. There is no dark in the real world. In the real world is light. It's described in Revelation is absolutely correct. There is no light. There is no dark. It's life, full life, as we cannot even conceive of with our human concepts. Yes, we're all tarred with the same brush. We're all sinners. We all, even if you stop eating meat, you've got to eat something. Do you think if you eat vegetables, you're killing anything less? You can't do anything. You can't function every time. You can't breathe without breathing in microbes and killing them. You can't walk without treading on things and killing them. Your very existence is again, as the Bible says, cursed is the ground for thy sake. As when Adam left paradise, which is all of our natural home paradise, and bear in mind there was only one Adam. Man was singular then. Man hadn't divided himself. That is the union, that's the true communion. Not communion with something, but union, one. And then you would go into separation, and cursed is the ground. And everyone's talking about it now. We call it a new word called conservation or something. But the whole world is infected with this disease of sin, which actually is humanity, is mortality. That which we so esteem as as human is actually a shadow of divine origin. It's a sort of inversion of real life. It's literally a disease. That's why it's full of corruption. It is, isn't it? No matter how healthy you try to live, you're going to die. That's the wages of sin, is death. Whatever dies isn't real life. And what in this world doesn't die because the whole world is infected with man's disease of sin. And that's why to return, to come back to our senses. In that story of the prodigal son that you quoted, it's a very important phrase. He was feeding the pigs, wasn't he? And he came back to his senses. That literally means he opened his eyes, he listened, he saw where he was. He said, I will arise and go home. And the father came to meet him with open arms, didn't he? Father ran to meet him with open arms. And you know, in the depths of meditation, far beyond where you and I can do anything, the door is open from the other side. And you get these, what might almost be described as love running to meet us with open arms. This spiritual love that holds this, not only you and me, but the whole of creation in those open arms. Remember, the less of me, the more of God. So that in truly surrendered meditation or prayer, long after you've forgotten about your own separate ego, there is actually, you are no longer limited. So it becomes an unlimited process. That's why it's true to say that I am also the first of sinners, because I'm the one that turns away in the first place. And I am is also the name of Christ.
As I recall, the etymology of the word sin is that it means to miss the mark. And, you know, perhaps the attenuation of sin involves sort of, as you've been saying, surrendering to God more and more, so that, presuming that God, if God were the complete motivator of our actions, they would hit the mark. They would be in tune with the will of God. And, you know, to the extent that we're involved, some egotistical volition, then we kind of divert that will of God and end up missing the mark.
Indeed. Indeed. We grope for words, don't we? Such is our human compulsion.
Well, there's a lot of terminology like that, you know, like you were quoting Jesus, thy will be done, not mine. And so there's always this theme of, let me get out of the way so that thy will can be done.
Yes. Well, yes, I don't know where the process ends. But here and now, whatever we make of our human situation, whatever condition it's in, there is this stillness, isn't there? This presence. Let's listen to it. It's so immediate, isn't it? Like an invisible hand that we can hold. So I can just put out my hand and hold it. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff comfort me. How true that is, and how many countless generations have used those lovely words for their funeral service, even though they wouldn't call themselves sophisticated spiritual people by any means.
I love that 23rd Psalm. My grandmother used to read it to me, you know, every night when I was a boy.
It was so widely known, wasn't it? I'm so grateful I was taught these things as a boy. Yeah. I really grieve for modern children who, under some sort of political correctness, are somehow deprived of this great heritage of these lovely words.
It's amusing that
And,
when
and,
you were
and
when you were a young man, you contemplated being a priest for a while, and that apparently the authorities told you you weren't Christian enough. It's kind of ironic.
After I learned meditation, I was so thrilled by it. I'd been reading Christian devotional books then, and I thought, this is exactly what it's all about. Suddenly it all began to make sense. Yeah. I went off to the local bishop and wanted to be a priest to share this knowledge. But yes, I've lived with most of my life under this this label, which half of which I'm half sorry about, half almost funny way proud of, not sufficiently Christian. Yeah. The church is a little bit more open now than it was when I started.
Well, you know, I think it would do church people good to do them well to study a little astronomy. There's something like 40 billion Earth-like planets in our galaxy and an estimated 10 trillion galaxies in the known universe. And I presume that any inhabited planet has had numerous religions on it, all of them, most of them claiming to be the only one. So if you kind of put that in perspective, it's like you can be a little bit more humble.
Well, I do have great respect for the Christian teaching. As I said to you, I think our mistake is that we keep Christ too small. Mm-hmm. And I think for me, meditation, as I was describing, realizing that in fact every lamb, every animal that is sacrificed for us is, to my understanding, I know some people will be enraged by what I say, but for me, that is Christ. Everything is Christ. And in my service to that, well, as we say, thank God, God judges finally. And I would just like to come back, as we're sort of getting into rather deep water when we speak, of this utter simplicity of this stillness that is so near, so without any pretentious names of it being Christ or anything else. It's just this simple, immediate rest. Rest is another good word for it. Rest, silence, stillness, peace. They're all the same. That is, hopefully you're picking up some of it just maybe from hearing my voice, hearing this interview.
Oh, I am. I think you have a very soothing, settling effect. In fact, somebody took the audio of the Conscious TV interview you did with Ian McNay and put up a YouTube video that's called something like the most, I think it was like the best cure for insomnia or something, because your voice is so soothing.
I'm greatly amused by this, and also this ASMR that some people like, because I didn't know what ASMR is.
I don't either. What is that?
Well, I shan't attempt to explain it to you. But it's some new word that people are using for that sort of soothing voice.
Oh, I see. Okay.
But if it's not, it can't really. It's not really my voice, but it probably is something to do with my many years of surrender to this real soothing, the real comfort, which is this spiritual presence. In fact, again, just from the Bible, Jesus refers to the Spirit as the Comforter, doesn't he? And it is that.
Well, that's kind of what I was alluding to before when I spoke of transmitting something, because I think it kind of permeates one's makeup after a while, and one can't help but sort of radiate that quality,
I still feel safer to call myself a sinner than a conveyor of anything better.
Well, that's okay.
But, if some people pick that up, well, glory be to God, not me.
Yeah. Nice. So to wrap it up, if you were to sort of try to say in a sentence or two, what the essential lesson or wisdom is that you have learned in this life, that you could impart to or bequeath to anyone who cares to pick it up, what would that be? Doesn't even have to be 2 sentences. You can go on a little bit if you want to.
Well, you've asked me to put it into words, but I always feel safest, really, when I'm silent. But if you press me to put it into words, perhaps the less of me, the more of God.
Good. And we can leave it at that. I don't know if you even want to elaborate on that, because that kind of says it all, doesn't it?
And it's always now. It's always in the here and now. I know this has become quite fashionable now, hasn't it, to talk about
Eckhart Tolle.
Is very good at conveying this, but it's the timeless message that God is present, and all that our human, all that we yearn and hunger for is to be found in those words, the less of me, the more of God. Paradise awaits us. It's real. It's really real. It's not a matter of belief. It's a matter of experience, of real experience. So, dear friends, be encouraged.
Yeah.
Tread the pilgrim's way. Face the ups and downs. Takes courage very often. The path of darkness.
I think we could say also that paradise that awaits us is really everyone's birthright. It's not anything that it's the kind of exclusive privilege of a few. It's something that we all universally have access to if we choose to take advantage of that access.
We always think in terms of plural, don't we? Of we, but actually, as we surrender our separate existence, we draw closer to one undivided reality. And you see, even when just for a moment one gets a taste of this undivided oneness, then what is excluded? What is separate existence? Are all these egos as real as we think? Now there's a question. Don't we all die? Are we as real as we think? What happens to a nightmare when we wake up in the morning? What happens to it? What happens to darkness when you switch on the light? So where are all these hundreds and thousands of people queuing up to be enlightened? I used to think as a child when I first heard about heaven, well, where does God put all the people? What is it? We talk about the prayer of the saints. Well, are they just repeating Our Father which art in heaven over and over again? What does it all mean? That's why I struggled for many, many, many years with all these theological concepts. What on earth does it mean? Am I failing that I can't get it? And then it took me many, many years to be as sort of confidently acquainted with unity, with oneness as I am now. But truly in oneness, there's no more separation left. The whole world of separation, all these millions and billions of people, and Never mind people, billions of ants and animals. We're, I mean, we're all in the same cart, as it were. It simply, it's just works of dark and it disappears. It's like a dream. When you wake up, it's no longer like that. There's only one perfection, one completion. To make whole, be whole. Do you think I've figured it out at long last what it actually means? It's taken me, it's taken me well nigh 60 years.
Well, and I think you've made it clear that you didn't figure it out through some clever intellectual process. Even the word figure it out doesn't do justice to it, because it sort of resolved itself as your experience really matured and blossomed.
Yes, exactly, yes. And yet you can't not figure it out so long as figuring it out is real for you. So I think we can't avoid this long, slow, painful process of dealing with our separate existence, step by step, unmasking it. And that's why I so esteem this blessed practice of meditation, which in a way does it for us. Because what we don't know, we just follow this practice. And, well, miraculously, it happens.
Yeah.
That's really all I've done. I've just plodded on with practice through a long life.
Well, as I think they say, what was it? Star Trek, live long and prosper. I think you've done that. Although prosper would not necessarily, I don't think Leonard Nimoy meant it in the financial sense when he said that in Star Trek. And I think you've done that admirably, and it's really a kind of an honor to spend some time with you.
Thank you very much. May I just say, God bless you all.
Thank you, John. So let me just make a couple of quick concluding remarks. I've been speaking with John Butler. John lives in, I believe it's called Bakewell, which is in northern UK someplace, or yeah. And you know, if you were planning to go to the UK and would like to visit John, I think he'd be open to that. You might want to get in touch through his website to make sure he's feeling up to it or is going to be there or whatever. But you can go and meditate with him in the church, or perhaps have some tea and have a chat or something like that. And I think it would be a very edifying experience. So thank you, John. And thanks to those who've been listening or watching, and we'll see you next week. Next interview will be with Bonnie Greenwell, who's been on Buddha at the Gas Pump before, and we'll be discussing some different material than we discussed in the first interview, but Bonnie is quite knowledgeable about Kundalini and various mechanics of physiological transformation that take place during the spiritual journey. So thanks for listening, and we'll see you then.